Have you ever felt like you need someone else's approval just to exist? Like every step you take, every word you speak, every choice you make has to pass through an invisible judge who may or may not give you permission to breathe. It's exhausting, isn't it? That silent weight pressing down on your chest when you wonder if people like you enough, if you said the right thing, if you were impressive enough to be accepted. Deep down, you know the cost of chasing approval is heavy. Yet you can't stop. You find yourself running again and again for applause that never really fills the emptiness. And what makes it worse is the quiet shame that creeps in afterward. When you realize you betrayed yourself just to keep someone else happy, that's when anxiety starts to whisper, telling you you're only as valuable as the approval you collect. It's like wearing a mask that grows heavier every day. At first, it feels protective. You put it on to be safe, to hide the parts of you that you fear won't be loved. Maybe you smile when you don't want to. Maybe you agree when your whole body screams no. Maybe you laugh at jokes that cut into your soul just to avoid standing out. But over time, the mask no longer feels like protection. It feels like suffocation. It presses against your skin, digging into your spirit, until you start to forget what your real face even looks like. Have you noticed that? How pretending to be who others want you to be slowly erases who you truly are. Jung called this mask the persona, the face we show to the world. It's not entirely false. Sometimes it's necessary. At work, in society, even in family, we all carry a certain role. But here's the problem. When the mask becomes a master, when you start to believe the mask is a whole of you, something inside begins to starve. The hidden self, the one who longs to be seen and loved without conditions, gets buried. And when that buried self pushes against the surface, you feel it as restlessness, emptiness, anxiety. That gnawing thought, if they really knew me, would they still care? Maybe you felt it at work, when you wanted to voice your opinion but swallowed it down, fearing judgment. Maybe you felt it in relationships, nodding along to things that broke your heart, terrified of being left behind. Or maybe you've caught yourself scrolling endlessly through social media, comparing your life to polished images, and thinking, if only I could be more like them, then I'd finally be enough. Each of these moments is like tightening the straps of that mask, making it harder to breathe, harder to remember your own voice. But let me ask you something. How long can you live this way? How many more years can you trade your peace for approval, your truth for applause? If the mask keeps getting heavier, what will be left of you underneath it? The truth is, the constant chase for approval is a hunger that never ends. You could collect 1,000 compliments, 1,000,000 likes, a lifetime of validation, and still feel empty the next morning. Because approval doesn't heal. Approval doesn't love you. It only feeds the mask. And the more you feed the mask, the more starved your true self becomes. Here's the promise. Today, we're going to explore how to break free from this cycle. Jung left us a map, a way of seeing ourselves that reveals why this chase feels so endless and how we can finally step off the treadmill. You'll see that you don't have to keep running after other people's approval. You don't have to keep wearing a mask that suffocates you. You can choose something different. You can begin to live in a way that feels real, grounded, and free. But before we get there, we need to understand something deeper. Because approval seeking is not just a bad habit. It's not just insecurity. It's something happening within your psyche. It's a hidden mechanism that shapes your choices, your relationships, even your sense of worth. And unless you see it clearly, it will keep pulling the strings of your life without you even realizing it. So the real question we must ask is this. What happens inside of us when we live only to please others? What unseen forces are at play every time we silence our voice, betray our needs, or pretend to be someone we're not? The answer might surprise you. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung had a word for that heavy mask we've been talking about, the persona. It's the face we put on to meet the world, the version of ourselves carefully shaped to gain approval, respect, or safety. At first glance, it doesn't seem like a bad thing. We all need a certain social role. When you go to work, you may put on the persona of the professional. At a family gathering, maybe it's the role of the dutiful son or daughter. With friends, maybe you become the easygoing one who never makes waves. The persona has a function. It protects us from rejection. It smooths our way in society. But here's the danger. If you start to believe the mask is a whole of you, you lose touch with the deeper, living self that exists underneath. Let me tell you a story. Imagine a young man named Daniel. On the surface, he has everything together. At work, he's admired, always polite, efficient, agreeable. At parties, he's the one people point to and say, "There goes someone who has it all figured out." His clothes are perfect, his smile practiced, his words chosen carefully to never offend. Everyone thinks Daniel is confident, composed, and unshakable. But what no one sees is what happens when Daniel goes home and closes the door. Alone in his apartment, the mask falls off, and underneath, he feels empty, anxious, and unbearably tired. Sometimes he stares at the ceiling, wondering why he can't feel joy, even though he's doing everything right. His persona, the mask he wears so well, has become a prison. Doesn't that sound familiar? Maybe you've been Daniel in your own way. Maybe people admire you, call you dependable, the one they can count on. But inside, you sometimes wonder if anyone really knows you at all. Maybe you've caught yourself smiling when you wanted to cry, nodding when you wanted to scream, no, laughing when your heart was breaking. And you begin to wonder, is this mask showing who I am, or just who others expect me to be? Jung warned us that while a persona can be useful, it's also dangerous. A mask can help you survive a moment, but if you never take it off, you forget that you even have a face of your own. Over time, the mask doesn't just hide you, it starts to consume you. The more you invest in it, the harder it becomes to admit that it isn't the real you. And when people praise the mask, it creates a hollow echo inside, because deep down, you know they're not seeing your true self. They're applauding a character you've been forced to play. And here's the paradox. The very thing that was meant to protect you ends up imprisoning you. The persona shields you from rejection, but also cuts you off from authenticity. It wins you approval, but it costs you intimacy. It gives you safety, but it starves your soul. And the longer you wear it, the more difficult it becomes to remember the sound of your own true voice. So what happens when a mask is no longer something you put on for a moment, but becomes the only face you know? What happens when persona begins to dominate the entire life of a person? That's where Jung's insights take us deeper. Think about how this plays out in your daily life. At work, maybe your boss asks you to take on another project, even though your plate is already overflowing. You want to say no. You feel the word rising in your throat, but it dies before it reaches your lips. Why? Because you fear disapproval. You're terrified of being seen as lazy, unhelpful, or replaceable. So you swallow your truth and nod with a smile, even as your body aches under the weight of another responsibility. That's the mask tightening its grip. In relationships, it might look like silencing yourself to keep the peace. Maybe you don't bring up the things that bother you because you're afraid of conflict. You stay quiet when someone crosses a boundary because you'd rather endure the sting of disrespect than risk being left behind. On the outside, you look agreeable, easygoing, good. But inside, resentment builds, your chest grows heavy, and you wonder why love feels so lonely. Again, the mask is in control. And then there are the endless scrolls through social media. You post the curated photos, the polished moments, waiting for the little heart icons to flood your screen. Each like feels like a tiny breath of relief. They see me, they approve, but the relief never lasts. The next morning, the hunger returns, emptier than before. You become addicted not to connection, but to applause. And no matter how much you get, it's never enough. Jung once said, "The approval of others will never replace the approval of oneself." Think about that. How many times have you tried to fill a hole inside you with compliments, promotions, attention, or likes, only to find it echoing just as loudly afterward? That's because external approval can't touch the part of you that longs to be seen as you truly are. Only your own acceptance can do that. Living this way is like being tied to invisible strings, move around like a puppet. Each string is someone else's opinion, someone else's expectation. When they pull, you move. When they frown, you shrink. When they smile, you stretch yourself to please them again. It's as if your whole life is being choreographed by forces outside of you, while your real self remains hidden in the shadows, voiceless and unseen. But here's the haunting part. This invisible thread doesn't just exhaust you, it hides an even greater danger. Because when you live only for approval, something vital inside of you begins to wither. This is where the hidden cost begins to reveal itself. Living for approval may seem harmless at first. A little smile here, a small compromise there. But over time, the weight becomes unbearable. You start to feel emotionally drained, like a well that's been pumped dry. You show up for everyone, bend yourself into the shape they want. But when the day ends and you're finally alone, the silence is deafening. You can be surrounded by people, admired even, yet feel completely invisible. That's the cruel paradox. The more you chase approval, the lonelier you become. Slowly, something even darker sets in, the erosion of identity. You wake up one morning and realize you don't really know who you are anymore without someone else's opinion to define you. What do you like truly? What do you believe in honestly? What do you dream about when no one is watching? The answers feel blurry, almost unreachable, because your life has been lived in a reflection of others. You've been so busy keeping the mask in place that the real face underneath has become a stranger. And then comes the emptiness. It's not a loud emptiness. It's quiet, constant, like a clock ticking without ever striking the hour. No matter what you do, no matter how much praise you collect, you can't escape that hollow ache inside. It feels like time itself has stopped for you, like your soul is waiting for a moment that never comes. That's the tragedy of approval seeking. It promises belonging, but delivers only an endless hunger that nothing outside of you can satisfy. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that never shows your own reflection. Instead, it only projects back the opinions, expectations, and judgments of others. Day after day, you look into it, hoping to catch a glimpse of your true self, but all you see are borrowed faces, borrowed voices, borrowed lives. That mirror becomes a prison, one that convinces you that you are only as real as the approval reflected back at you. But here's the truth. Jung discovered that this mirror can be shattered. There's a way to step beyond the endless chase, to break the glass that keeps you trapped, and to finally see your own face again. Not the mask, not the reflection, but the living self that has been there all along, waiting. The question is, how do we break the mirror and rediscover the true self hidden beneath? Jung believed the way out of this endless chase wasn't to destroy the mask completely, but to remember that you are far more than the mask. He called this process individuation, the journey of becoming whole, where your true self emerges stronger than the roles you've been forced to play. Think of it as a map, one that guides you from the prison of approval into the freedom of authenticity. The first step is recognition. You have to notice the moments when you're bending yourself for the sake of applause. Ask yourself, where in my life am I saying yes when I mean no? Where am I posting, speaking, or acting just to hear the echo of approval? Awareness is the spark that begins to loosen the strings of the puppet. Without recognition, the mask stays invisible. With it, you begin to see the weight you've been carrying. The second step is integration. This means turning toward the shadow, the parts of you that you've been hiding because you fear they won't be accepted. Maybe it's your anger, your sadness, your need for rest, your longing for more. Instead of pushing those parts into the dark, you begin to say, "This too is me." Jung believed that healing comes not from perfection, but from wholeness. To integrate the shadow is to take off the mask and say, "I am both light and dark, both strength and weakness, and I am still worthy." The third step is action. Not grand, heroic action, but simple, conscious choices that come from within, not from outside expectations. It might look like saying a small no today, even if your voice shakes. It might mean writing down your true opinions in a journal, without editing them for someone else's approval. It could be practicing silence before you react, pausing long enough to hear your own voice instead of rushing to please. These microactions may seem small, but each one chips away at the mirror of approval until you can see your own reflection clearly again. And then comes a final step, legacy. This isn't about leaving behind a monument or a perfect story. It's about living so authentically that your courage becomes contagious. When you choose truth over applause, you give silent permission for others to do the same. Your life becomes a living reminder that freedom is possible. Jung knew that individuation wasn't just about personal healing. It was about becoming a light for others, showing them that they too can walk without the mask. This is the map: recognition, integration, action, legacy. A path that leads from suffocation to breath, from emptiness to meaning, from puppet strings to freedom. But even with a map, even with the right intentions, there are traps along the way, because the desire for approval doesn't vanish overnight. It disguises itself, waiting to sneak back in and sabotage your freedom. So the question we must face now is, what are the invisible traps that can still pull us back into the chase? Even on the path to freedom, there are shadows waiting to pull you back. Jung warned that transformation is not a straight line, it's a spiral. You grow, you stumble, you rise again. But if you don't pay attention, certain traps can quietly sabotage your progress and leave you wearing a new mask without even realizing it. The first trap is ego inflation. After breaking free from the need for approval, some people swing to the other extreme. They confuse authenticity with arrogance, believing they're above everyone else. I don't care what anyone thinks, they say, but underneath, they've simply traded one mask for another, the mask of superiority. Instead of seeking approval, they seek dominance. It may feel powerful for a moment, but it only deepens a loneliness, because arrogance builds walls where connection could have grown. The second trap is isolation. Authenticity does not mean rejecting human connection. Yet some people, after years of being suffocated by others' expectations, retreat too far inward. They mistake solitude for wholeness, forgetting that individuation isn't about cutting yourself off from the world, but showing up in it as your truest self. Isolation may feel safe, but it stars you of the very relationships that can reflect your authenticity back to you. The third trap is the savior complex. This one is especially subtle because it looks noble on the surface. You may feel that your worth comes from always helping others, always rescuing, always being the dependable one. But underneath, the old hunger for approval is still at work. Instead of love me for who I am, it becomes love me for what I give you. And that too is a mask, one that drains you until there's nothing left for yourself. The fourth trap is regression. This happens when fear or uncertainty hits, and you slip back into the old patterns. Maybe you find yourself saying yes too quickly again, or hiding your true feelings because it feels safer. This doesn't mean you failed. It just means the old mask still lingers in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. What matters is noticing it, forgiving yourself, and choosing again. Growth is not about never slipping. It's about remembering the path back when you do. History gives us vivid reminders of these choices. Think of Nietzsche, brilliant yet consumed by pride, whose isolation left him in despair. Contrast that with Meister Eckhart, who embraced silence, humility, and presence, not as withdrawal, but as a deeper entry into life. One path led to loneliness, the other to peace. The difference wasn't intellect, but balance. Jung compared the process of individuation to the growth of a seed. And here's the thing about seeds. Even the strongest one can wither if it isn't cared for. Your authenticity is no different. It needs balance, sunlight and shadow, solitude and connection, strength and humility. Without that care, even the most powerful awakening can dry up. But when you overcome these traps, when you nurture your growth with balance and patience, something extraordinary begins to unfold. And this is the moment everything shifts. After years of chasing applause, bending yourself for acceptance, and living as a reflection of other people's expectations, you finally discover something radical. You don't need external approval to exist. In the quiet space within you, where the noise of likes, praise, and judgment can't reach, you hear a voice you had nearly forgotten, your own. At first it feels small, almost fragile, but as you allow yourself to listen, it grows steady, strong, certain. This is the rebirth Jung pointed us toward. The emergence of true self, no longer enslaved by masks, no longer starved by endless hunger for validation. Picture the mirror you've stood before all your life, the one that only showed you the opinions and expectations of others. Now imagine it shattering into 1,000 shards. For a moment it feels like ruin, like loss. But then, slowly, those fragments begin to form something new. They don't return to the flawless mirror you once hoped for. Instead, they come together as a stained glass window. The cracks remain, The colors are uneven. Yet when light shines through, beauty radiates. The very fractures that once felt like weakness now become the channels through which your soul shines brightest. This is a paradox of wholeness. The parts you try to hide, your fear, your sadness, your anger, your longing, were never mistakes. They were ingredients of your humanity, woven together. They create a mosaic that is far more honest and beautiful than any mask could ever be. You realize that perfection was never the goal. Authenticity was. And authenticity is where freedom lives. Freedom doesn't mean you'll never face rejection. It doesn't mean everyone will cheer for you. It means you no longer live and die by their applause. It means you have the courage to speak your truth, to say yes when your heart agrees and no when your spirit resists. It means you step forward even when others misunderstand, because you know your worth is not up for negotiation. So hear this clearly. The journey is not about destroying who you were, but about allowing who you truly are to rise. The mask falls, the silence deepens, and in that silence, your real self finally breathes again. Freedom begins the moment you drop the mask of approval. If this message spoke to you, write in the comments, "I choose to live with authenticity." And if you want to go even deeper, watch the next video I prepared about how to integrate your shadow without fear.